Our next speaker is Francesca West. She's CEO of Protect. Now, Hayley's session focused on mental well-being, and a number of our speakers have talked about that. But Protect really explore how organisations can have, appropriate whistleblowing arrangements. And I think that's important when we think of businesses and the well-being of your teams. It's important that if something is happening that people are not comfortable with, then they understand how to go about reporting that, and there are processes in place. So I think a fascinating session for us to finish on before we close to lunch. So please welcome Francesca. Thank you.
Hello, I face the unenviable task of standing between you and your lunch now, but I promise I'm hungry too, and I will do a whistle-stop tour to give you just some idea of the work that we do and how relevant it may be to your organisation. There's certainly some common themes that I can sense from the panel that apply to the whistleblowing piece as well. Where this doesn't work, it leads to real harm in the workplace being allowed to flourish. Issues that staff could and would have spoken up about all of a sudden aren't heard, aren't listened to appropriately, and for the member of staff that may be trying to challenge poor practice, they are left incredibly isolated and lonely in the workplace as well. And in our view, that is unnecessary. Thinking about good systems, good communication, getting out there, talking to your staff, and making sure that you make it clear to them that you're prepared to have a conversation about the most difficult things at the earliest possible stage can really make a world of difference. So just to give you a quick overview of us to start with as well, we were previously called Public Concern at Work. You may have heard of us, but we changed our name on the 10th of September to Protect, because we think Protect is actually what is at the heart of whistleblowing, and the whole point around us is that speak up, stop harm is our strap line. We're really hoping that when we work with individuals, we're helping them speak up at that earliest possible stage, and it's really about stopping the unavoidable disaster, being able to actually get out there and make sure that people are protected in practice. So it can apply to all sorts of different areas as well. Obviously, one of the key areas that might be covered by the whistleblowing umbrella would be safeguarding, and there's lots of specific things within your safeguarding policies that you'll be thinking about that may be really good. And what we find when we work with many different sectors is they'll have a key area of risk that they focus on. So in this sector, it may be safeguarding. When you're in construction, it could be health and safety. But you can learn an awful lot from very developed or sophisticated systems to think about actually how do I expand this to think about whistleblowing more broadly, that wrongdoing piece more broadly, and I'm being consistent about what I'm saying to my staff as well so that it fits with other reporting systems. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about some myth busting around whistleblowing, some of the current challenges we see that are very, very specific to this sector, and also to give you an idea of where to look for a good framework to let you know how you're doing. So the cornerstone of what we do is free, confidential advice to individuals when they're unsure how or whether to raise a concern. So we've been around for about 25 years, and the fundamental point there is we are a legal advice centre. I'm one of the lawyers there, and you'll just have to forgive me for that. But I promise the point of being a legal advice centre is that we are a safe haven for people to come to, because when you come to us for advice, it's protected by legal professional privilege, which means we can't go anywhere without your express consent. So people can come and tell us about all the difficult issues that may be going on, maybe whether or not they're worried about their own involvement and so on, knowing that we will give them that impartial, professional, objective advice in a very difficult situation. Now, the vast majority of individuals that I think come to the advice line started the whistleblowing process without meaning to. So they've seen something going wrong, and it just didn't simply feel right to say nothing. So many people that approach our advice line have already raised their concern, and they're either being ignored or they're being victimised. So they're already in quite a difficult place. And the reality is we just don't know if tomorrow we're going to go into the workplace and we're going to see something that makes us feel uncomfortable, and it simply won't feel right to say nothing. So this is an issue that can affect any member of staff, and it can affect any organisation. No matter how well you run things, there's still a possibility that things can go wrong. So the advice line is really there for that critical moment. For whatever reason, it doesn't feel like you can raise things in a normal way. It's a safety net. So at the very least, flag the existence of our advice line to your staff. It's free to do that, and many organisations do. Another critical part of what we do is supporting and training organisations to get things right, and also creating frameworks for organisations so they can think about what to do with whistleblowing. It's obviously not just a policy, it's what you do in practice. It's how you train key staff that might be a really critical recipient of concerns, and also how you make sure that everyone in the organisation is alive to what a concern is and how to raise it. And that sort of very basic level awareness and understanding is often missing in this piece. We also do a lot of campaigning on public policy and promote public interest whistleblowing laws. So we've advised around 40,000 individuals to date. Healthcare, education, as you can imagine, they're our top sectors, and some of the issues that we hear about is financial malpractice, ethical issues, patient safety, and so on. But we really do hear from the sublime to the ridiculous on the advice line, and that could be anything from the AIDS testing of staff without consent to concerns around safeguarding, 200 million tax evasion. So you really don't know what you're going to pick up the phone to next. And for us, it's about creating a supportive and professional environment for that person to raise and discuss their concern, so that we can really help them navigate what can be a very complex system at times to ensure they get the information to the right person in the right way to ensure that they have the best chance possible to do something about it. So that's just our simple summary of whistleblowing. Whistleblowing has a different impact in terms of what people respond to in terms of the word. So you may not want to call it whistleblowing in your organisation, maybe you don't. It's speaking up, it's raising a concern, but language is obviously important. So pitching the policy in a way that resonates with the people that you work with is obviously quite critical. You can use the word whistleblowing in financial services sector, that's fine. You absolutely can't use it in health. So you will have to have a feel of where you sit in your sector as well. One thing that can be really important is helping staff understand the difference between these two issues. Now, we say whistleblowing concerns is when it's a risk to others. You may also be affected, but there's a tip-off or witness piece, and it's actually about establishing accountability and having a practical and pragmatic approach to the issue. Obviously, where it's a grievance and so on, it is where the individual is more at risk themselves and they need to prove their case, and helping the individual understand which direction they need to take can be an important beginning of the triaging process around whistleblowing. So as you can see, it can completely range, and some issues will obviously appear to be public interest issues, but there's a good likelihood that you will have many cases where people come with a pot of concerns, and you'll need to think about how you pull the things apart to make sure that you investigate some things as whistleblowing issues and you give someone the appropriate support they need to make a personal complaint or raise a grievance, whatever they may wish to do. But this is the reality of where whistleblowers sit. They have three options, really, when they first see something going wrong. And I think it's important to recognise that there are a large number of individuals where their first instinct may be to keep quiet. Now, whether or not you have a silence in the workplace is going to be affected really by what people have seen happen in the past. Essentially, if you walk into a workplace and everyone seems to be completely comfortable with the fire in the corner, you're going to be less likely to say something because you will follow the attitude of the individuals around you. So that don't rock the boat, I don't know why I'm questioning it when no one else is a very real reason why someone might keep quiet. Also, if there's a history of victimisation in the organisation or a sense that the organisation doesn't listen, again, these are quite powerful reasons why someone might not speak up. What we obviously want to get to is a place where people raise things internally. Now, there's some huge challenges around that in terms of, particularly, I think, in this sector, when you've got a huge volunteer workforce, when you've got people that aren't necessarily a worker in the traditional sense. How do you include them in your policies? How do you make it clear that even though they may not have legal rights, it's actually really important to make clear that you as an organisation will support and protect them if things start to go wrong, or if they in any way feel at risk in speaking up. Some of those messages are so important to get across to the people that you think are on the front line of seeing things that go wrong. However, poor relationships with management, poor communication, all these kinds of things will create barriers to raising things internally. An individual will think about going outside. Now, if it's not clear to them where they go, people will think about making anonymous disclosures to the media, which is the most unhelpful way for you to hear about serious problems in your organisation, but a really important mechanism. But for many individuals, that is an utterly daunting step, and we know from many people on our advice line that is not somewhere they would like to start. They recognise it's the end of their employment relationship, and the reality is, if it feels overwhelming, they're going to go back to the most dangerous option, which is keeping quiet, which I hope we can all agree is the worst outcome for the public interest, and certainly for the people that we're trying to look after in the organisations we work for. So this is just a few myths from our whistleblowing report, The Inside Story. Now, just a quick caveat to this. People don't call us to tell us that things are going well and they raise their concern with their boss and they gave them a cuddle. That's not why they're calling the advisor. They're calling us because things are going wrong. So this is a snapshot of those cases. But there's some important myths to bust out here because they will help you understand how this really works in the workforce. And if you're designing your arrangements or if you're thinking about raising a concern yourself, some of these things will really help you think about those patterns. So whistleblowers are not persistent in raising concerns. When people come to our advice line, they raise things once and sometimes twice. We stopped measuring after 4 times of someone trying to raise it because about the 1,000 cases, only 22 individuals raise things 4 or more times. So this idea of this persistent individual that keeps going, that is actually a very rare and tenacious individual. Whistleblowers will raise a concern externally. That's also false. A vast majority of individuals will raise things internally and they will feel very daunted by going outside. Only 0.5% of the cases involve someone going straight to the media. Whistleblowers are very likely to be dismissed. Now, we also found this to be a false statistic. I think if you looked at what happens in the media, you might be concerned that if you blew the whistle, you'd lose your house, your spouse, and anything that you cared about. The reality is, from what we see of our cases, and again, bearing in mind this is already a group of people that are experiencing difficulties, only 60% say there was no negative or positive response to them raising a concern. What they're actually experiencing is being ignored. Now, that in and of itself is an incredibly isolating thing. It's incredibly difficult when you've actually recognised that there's something wrong that you're not comfortable with happening in the workplace and it doesn't feel like anybody's listening. And worse, you think the practice is continuing. So that in and of itself is still an issue. Of the 40% that said they did feel a negative outcome, 15% said they were dismissed, and much, much smaller than the media might have you believe. But the most common response in that 40% was informal discipline. So the isolation, the ostracisation, the denial of promotion, the sense that you really are the outsider, which is what makes whistleblowing such an incredibly lonely journey if there's not proper support in the workplace. And the one that's quite interesting as well is most whistleblowers are new members of staff. I think the reality is that people may come into a workplace and just think, well, that's not how it happened in my last workplace, so why is everyone all right with this here? These practices aren't safe. The attitude of this one individual isn't appropriate. And they can be really good fresh eyes for you. So thinking about when people come in and join your workforce or however it is that you're interacting with your huge volunteer base, if you have one, it is really important to help them understand that you really care about it if they've seen something going wrong, and please tell you as quickly as possible. They don't have to prove it. And lastly, raising a whistleblowing concern is rare. 1 in 10 individuals say in a UK survey that we do that they've seen serious malpractice in the last 2 years. That to me tells me this really could be something you come across tomorrow. 2 out of 3 of those go on to raise it, but 1 out of 3 don't, which means in our workforce in the UK, we've got 1 in 30 workers sitting on serious information they don't feel able to raise. So it gives you some idea of how important it is we tackle some of these barriers to make sure people speak up as early as possible. So these are some of the key challenges in sport that I really just want to whip through. The awareness, the experience and the history and the confidence of individuals. Obviously, there has been some scandals in the media recently that may have affected people's confidence in speaking out. And you want to make sure that you are communicating with your staff in a way that says, that's not what's going to happen here. If you are worried, if something's bothering you, if you've seen something, say something. And it's getting those very clear messages across so you counteract any a wider impression of what might be going on. And also really thinking about scope and really working out if your athletes, volunteers, members, parents, who are you encouraging to speak to, how and when, and just thinking through some of that messaging and making sure it's really, really clear, really accessible, multiple channels for communication, and thinking about where their support is as well. And again, thinking about through communications, but also if you are putting things right and you're out there and you're hearing from the people that you're working with, let them know how you've put it right. This is one of the huge areas we see organisations falling down. They get a very serious issue, they run away and deal with it, and they don't go back to the individual who then thinks it hasn't been resolved, who then thinks the organisation doesn't care, and maybe saying that to multiple other individuals as well. Communication, communication, communication. That is absolutely at the heart of good whistleblowing arrangements. So Yep, one last thing. So what can you do about it? We have a benchmark where essentially it looks through all the different areas of whistleblowing, from leadership all the way through to trust and confidence and doing the right training. So take the benchmark test. At the very least, it will give you a framework of all the things that we say are a good idea to think about if you want successful whistleblowing arrangements. And if you want, you can also get benchmarking information as to how you're performing against other organisations. So we've got a stand out in the atrium. Cushy and Mark, who are in the audience here, if you've got any questions about the benchmark, please come and see us. Thank you.